not from within USF is the umbrella organization for all data science and data engineering programming and research that happens here at the university. And we are really delighted to welcome back one of our own, Shree Bharathan, alumna of the MS in Data Science. Well, were you Data Science or were you MSAM?
Data Science.
You're Data Science, okay. MSDS program, and now Senior Data Scientist at Meta, where she leads LLM-based transcript analytics and sales quality initiatives. So Shree will talk about how large language models can move from technical innovation to real business impact, how they can automate workflows, support decision-making, and improve customer experiences when they're aligned with real organizational needs. We are really thrilled to have Shree here with us today, so please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you. I'm just going to do a quick mic check. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let me slides here. Sorry, just trying to get it here for you. Okay, this is painful, I'm sorry. Finally, we got that. Thank you so much for that intro, Elizabeth, really appreciate it. I'm quite glad to be back here. I wasn't on the other side very long ago. I graduated, I was part of the COVID batch, so graduated in 2020. And yeah, super excited to be presenting today on applying LLMs to solve business problems and how data scientists can start building impact. A quick intro about myself and my journey as a data scientist. I've had about 8+ years of experience in data science and machine learning. I've worked in a couple of different areas of tech and consulting, but always had a strong focus on machine learning and AI. Like I said, an alumna of USF MS program, and as Elizabeth already pointed out, currently working at Meta in a monetization team. So moving into our topic, LLMs are obviously everywhere. I'm probably not the first person to speak to you about this topic, and definitely not the last. So regardless of the industries that we work in, be it tech, finance, healthcare, every single business is wanting to use LLMs in everything possible. So today's talk is really going to be focused on how do we translate all of those models to impact. Obviously, LLMs are really great for various different use cases. They enable really quick and instant development and can be scaled out very quickly. Overall, I feel one of the biggest advantages to using LLMs is the improved decision velocity for the business. However, there are obvious challenges with LLMs as well, most notably with hallucinations and non-deterministic results. And there are these trade-offs to consider as you think about robust validations by including human-in-the-loop evaluations if necessary. Additionally, there's also a high operational cost involved in building and scaling the AI infrastructure and conducting large-scale human evaluations. Of course, despite this shortcomings to LLMs, I do believe strongly that most companies want to build these applications and scale out quickly, as I said, and they have become a very key part of the DS toolkit today. I truly believe that leveraging LLMs in the right way can help us become 10x data scientists. Having been in this space for a few years now since the whole AI boom, I want to share with you some examples and frameworks of how to think about creatively solving these problems using LLMs and while driving good business impact. Let's start to look at an example deep dive to showcase how to drive business impact with LLMs. Assume that you are a data scientist and you are now tasked with classifying customer sentiment using LLMs. This is a problem statement given to you. You go ahead, you derive this architecture, you use different prompts, and you build this out. You have insights ready, and you present to your audience that 25% of the customers in your customer base had negative sentiment and were unhappy. While that itself is a good insight to show to your stakeholders, And of course, it's a huge shift from where they started of not having any idea on what the sentiment of customers look like to now knowing that 25% of customers being unhappy. I still think that while being a good starting point, it drives no clear action. So the real question comes into the picture of, so what can we do with this data? Here's how I think 10x data scientists may approach the same problem. They've essentially built the same sentiment framework using LLMs, but first conduct a causal study to establish a link with a key metric. In this case, it could be revenue. So as you can see here, they've showcased that positive sentiment drives revenue lift. Let's say 40% revenue lift, and this translates to so many $1 million of additional revenue. So what can we do with that? We know that positive sentiment drives more revenue for the business, but how do you go from converting that 25% of customers who are negative to positive? That leads us to a root cause analysis of why did the customer feel unhappy in the first place. With the root cause analysis, you now have an idea of what are the different reasons which caused negative sentiment in your customer base, and you can get to a clear call to action from this by saying that by resolving the root cause 1, you're going to get an X percentage higher positive sentiment, and this directly translates to some dollar amount of revenue lift for your business. In this case, you have a very clear call to action of implementing certain product changes is going to resolve the root cause 1 and therefore result in all these positive impact for the business. I think this is a great way to think about how you can translate a lot of different models and frameworks you're creating into business impact. So I put together a 5-step framework that allows us to go from insights to action, and this would be a good mental model to have as you think about impact. Let's go to the first step, building context. Before starting a project, you need to deeply understand the business problem and not just the technical task assigned. For example, when we talk about sentiment analysis, the task is quite clear on what you want to do and how you want to technically implement it. However, diving deeper to understand what would be the key metric, what is the needle you want to move with this data, can help you design the way that you work across this problem. Excitement about AI tools makes many of us forget the why. You need to clearly answer, what decision will this LLM output inform for the business? Alignments with stakeholders on quantifiable business outcomes is very crucial. Without this step, models will just become interesting reports and will not necessarily move the needle on key metrics. Let's go to step 2. This is more of an understand step. Before going into scaling and the infra and all the different problems you want to solve, I think it's important to pause and ask ourselves, can LLMs solve this problem? And if so, how well? In my experience, we often rush to use LLMs when there's an already simpler or cheaper solution which are more viable and available to us. By first understanding if the LLMs are necessary for your use case, this already sets us up for success. And you can proceed to prototype a solution, iterate heavily, based on different human-in-the-loop evaluations, and finally scale your product. Coming back to the so what question. We need to establish the link with key metrics to show impact of what you build. As we saw with the example of the sentiment framework, we can't just deliver a feature by itself. We need to clearly establish the so what of our work, and this leads us to linking every project to a key business metric by using rigorous statistical methods, like say experimentation, causal inference, or even just correlation studies. To connect innovations directly to the biggest KPIs, it could be anything for depending on your company and on your use case, it could be revenue, user engagement, or even retention. Again, just to get us back to the main thought here, we're not just trying to produce different insights, it's also about how you're validating your own investment as a data scientist. This transforms really great engineering into undeniable and measurable business impact and often secures funding for future work as well. Going to step 4, now that you have a key metric identified, how do you move this metric? We established the so what, and the next step I see is how to move the needle now. This answer will lie back in going to the original business context of the problem. What is truly preventing us from hitting our targets? We can use tools like root cause analysis, as I pointed out in the example, to deeply understand what is the status quo and identify specific bottlenecks from achieving certain goals. By uncovering the root cause, it could be anything, let's say for data quality or high latency, we can prioritize now what will have maximum leverage on key metrics. This will ensure that our efforts are focused, impactful, and directly solve the core of the problem. And moving over to the final step, we've now completed the analysis, we have key metrics ready, and we've also found the root cause now. Where do we go from here, and how do we really convince the business to take specific actions? I think the last leg here is very important in driving action and shaping strategy, which is to have clear recommendations and call to actions. I truly believe our job isn't just to drive reporting or insights, but to provide a clear, actionable recommendation to your key stakeholders. It needs to be very definitive and specific. The stakeholders exactly need to know what to do next. Based on this data, they can fund XYZ system or begin deployment of a certain framework in the next quarter. A clear call to action transforms a passive presentation into a decision point. This is how you would generate momentum, secure stakeholder buy-in, and ensure that specific insights translate directly into measurable results. I think those were the main thoughts I had on this framework, and I hope this is a good mental model to have to understand how we can go from insights and into action with a concrete example as well as a framework that's presented here. That comes to the end of my presentation, and I want to today jump into more questions. I definitely want this to be a more interactive discussion, so please feel free to ask your questions.
Do you have any questions from the audience? And then if you could please repeat the question.
Yes.
How does someone perform a root cause analysis?
That's a great question. I think there's different ways to approach this. There's something called like the 5 whys framework, where you kind of ask why and then you go into a answer, then go into the next step. But if you think about from a more technical perspective, it could be, like I was saying, beyond just understanding what was the sentiment of the customer in the example, you need to understand what drives a specific sentiment. This can be done either via LLMs, it can be done via various different methodologies, but very specific to each use case. But the fundamental concept here is to go back to your data to understand what causes X, Y, Z. So that's what I was referring to as root cause analysis. Thank you. Yeah.
I think in the beginning you talked about having an LLM output like a one-shot prompt and then output a certain result, like insight from the data. And I'm wondering, like, how do you know that? Because if you do a few shots or use different LLMs, maybe you might get different results. And I'm wondering if you do any evaluation on there to like know what LLM output is the most accurate.
Okay, I forgot to repeat the first one, but the second question I'm hearing is, how do you go from, actually could you say that again? How do you go from evaluating one shot?
How do you evaluate the LLM output?
Yes, so the question is on evaluating LLM outputs and having subsequent steps of either passing back to the LLM or human evaluations. I think that those are actually the 2 main methods I've used to evaluate LLM outputs. One is using LLM judges to pass back specific criteria to say, was this accurate or not? And the second sort of more in-depth process is to conduct human evaluation. So that's what I refer to as human in the loop, which means that you go back to specific reviewers who will conduct specific criteria that you want to judge on and provide accuracy and like different metrics on how you can provide either more examples to the LLM or define your prompts. So I think those would be the 2 main evaluation pieces. Go ahead.
Yeah. And actually, I know this is kind of rooted to the Meta's business experiment kind of culture. So it might be helpful if you can give us like one end-to-end story. Start with the issue, complete issue, and how to use OLM, and how do you verify the results, and how do you do the experiments, and how do you link to the fundamental metrics. I think that may give the audience a better picture if it gives one complete end-to-end story.
Yeah, so this question is on a concrete end-to-end story of how this is actually implemented in the industry. I think I can go back to some of my previous slides to showcase this. So this is one example problem that I can talk about where, let's say, company XYZ wants to classify customer sentiment using LLMs. I think the fundamental part of this is obviously building the framework, having set, evaluations to validate the outputs. What I wanted to showcase was the end-to-end framework here where we don't just stop with getting the data, but really going to either experiments or cost-effective studies to showcase how that translates back to specific metric lifts. In this case, I showcased how sentiment can drive positive revenue lift. Again, like the next part of this problem is not just knowing that, hey, sentiment can drive revenue lift, but how do you actually go back and update your business or product to move the customer sentiment needle to a positive experience, right? And that's where the root cause analysis becomes relevant. So now you've identified what causes that negative sentiment, and you can resolve it by applying a specific product change, and that leads to a measurable outcome of X% of revenue lift here. So that's what I wanted to showcase with this concrete example. I hope that was helpful. Again, like I cannot go into like specific data or numbers or actual methodologies much in depth here. I'm again representing only myself and not any specific company or entity while I share this. Hope that's helpful. I think you also had a question.
It was the same question.
Oh, cool. Great. Any other questions that you may have missed? Yes.
Hi, I'm Lynn. Thank you so much for my question is, we're in a marketplace like Meta, right? So like there's like advertisers and like users. For the monetization, do you guys tend to focus more on like advertiser measures or user metrics? If that matters, I can hold for like these types of questions.
Yeah, great question. So her question was for different marketplace where companies like Meta, where there's users, there's advertisers, different things. Like this could also be applicable to say DoorDash, Lyft, or other different companies. She was asking, does monetization focus more on user metrics or advertiser metrics? From my experience working on the monetization team, we definitely tend to focus more on advertiser metrics, specifically more on revenue and how much of that we can attribute to specific products and specific sales interventions. So again, I know this could be different depending on the context of the exact nature of the problem you're trying to solve or specific teams you work with, but I mostly work with the advertiser metrics. Yeah.
Are there cases where all of the testing is pointing to a specific call to action, but when you make that call to action, the results don't necessarily back that up?
Great question. So this question was on other cases where you derive a specific call to action, but implementing that doesn't actually move the metric at all. That's an interesting one. I think there's definitely situations where that's happened, but that just sends us back to step 2 of the root cause analysis or identifying where things went wrong. So it just leads into more deep dive researches. Again, like there may not be one specific reason that on why this happened. It could be a bug anywhere along the way. It could be a bug with the overall like LLM framework. It could be some data quality issues when it comes to measurement. So it really is about going back to the deep dive here if or when that happens.
But most of the time, it will, like, there will be significant results, like it agrees with your test.
Yeah, so the follow-up here is if most of the time the call to action will have specific result that agrees with your hypothesis. I think that's the reason why you want to establish rigorous sort of statistical methods to prove what you want to drive. So in my case, I've either used A/B testing experiments or causal inference studies to really understand the causal relationship between specific metrics here. So if there is an error in any of this, then it makes it very easy to backtrack into what went wrong. But I think that's the overall philosophy and approach.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think I missed one question there. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you give us like a day-to-day breakdown of what you do as a senior data scientist? Like what portion of your time is spent during like modeling? What portion of your time is spent during like troubleshooting?
So his question is the day-to-day as a data scientist, what portion of time is spent on modeling, what portion of time is spent on troubleshooting and other things. In my case, I would say at least 30 to 40% of my time goes into technical development, be it coding, modeling, or anything like that. There's a significant chunk that goes into, like say, 50 to 20% that goes into developing strategy, documentation, and communication. So this includes, identifying specific areas where we can focus our roadmap on, identifying specific wins that we have and documenting it to different partners to drive the vision for our overall team. And I think a good chunk of the remaining time goes into mentoring like junior data scientists as well as communications with different stakeholders. I think also in my case, I'm in a very cross-functional role where I have to interact with product managers, engineers, sales partners. So there's a lot of different vested interests and voices in the room. And as a data scientist, you are sought after for specific measurement standards, how that reflects movement in key business metrics. So I would say that would be the average split of time per week.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what LLMs are the engineers not able to use within Meta?
So the question is, what LLMs are engineers not able to use in Meta? Again, I cannot represent the company here. I can't think of any. I mean, because it's such a broad company with different initiatives, also where they're trying to develop different LLMs themselves and AI. So I don't have a clear answer on this, and I don't think I can represent the company to answer here.
So have you seen them use DeepSeek internally?
Sorry, I couldn't hear
Have you
you.
seen an engineer use DeepSeek for an internal product, for instance?
I personally have not, and I cannot comment on if they use DeepSeek. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I think in my personal experience, I sometimes really work with sales partners. Like they have a very strong idea of like what is like an issue, and sometimes you're able to back that up, sometimes you're able to not back that up. And so I was wondering like if you had any like guidance, had any perspective on like how to go about like putting that like building trust, sometimes changing their mind, oftentimes it's really like something that they're not willing to do, or to do more like a conversation.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So to repeat that, the question was about sales or non-technical partners having very strong opinions, and despite sharing certain results with data, not being able to influence how they think about certain things. I think this is a very real problem, especially with more non-technical audiences like sales or different functions like that, like marketing. I have actually come across that quite a lot when they are definitely closer to the day-to-day operations of things. So they have a very specific thing in mind where they cherry pick examples from what they see happening on the floor. I think the best way that I've been able to deal with this is to build long-term trust by establishing like, okay, these are the insights, this is what, or like really communicating like this, where they have a clear call to action or recommendation. It's really up to, the reason why I think it's better to have this than have no opinion as a data scientist is you're going with a specific recommendation. They can choose either to adapt that or not, but it already drives more clear thought process than just having a judgment or just having a preconceived notion on what they want to adapt, right? So I think one is building long-term trust, and the ways that you can do that is to really have strong communication, document different things, and also share with them in a way that's understandable and interpretable to a non-technical audience. Then also have really clear direction and metrics that will already drive your conversations in a way that's backed by data. Any other questions? Yeah.
Maybe you can help me. I just try to kind of dive deep into more concrete example. I understand, in your example, you have three very critical steps. Step one is identify the sentiment, especially the dissatisfied customer. That's step number one. Step number two is actually change certain product features to address these dissatisfied customers. Step number three is to experiment to see if the change the culture is going to boost your financial metrics because these people are happy. Maybe you can help us to understand how you use LLM to achieve each. Especially step number one, step number two. Step number one, I have some guess. How do you use LLM to do that? You probably use kind of certain keywords, certain behavior, and if the LLM find these behavior, these keywords, that means these customers are not satisfied, right? Is that correct? So I'm just asking, maybe you can help us. I am having a little problem with understanding how do you change from finding these dissatisfied customers to change particular product feature. How do you use the LLM to do that?
Okay, great question. So to repeat that for everyone, they were asking about the overall process here, split into three steps. First one is like identifying the customer sentiment by the LLM. Second one being what is the key metric that you're trying to move by resolving this issue that you identified from step one, and then finally trying to move that metric by implementing a product change. So to answer your, I guess this question, definitely I think what you called out as the methodology of having certain definitions or defining structurally what represents a specific segment, that's how I would go about it as well. There's different techniques you can use to advance your prompting. You can have a few short examples. You can context engineer with specific things from your data that you want to add into the prompts. So that's definitely how you would go about step one. In terms of how you get to the next step, you already have data now from step one on what bucket of your customers are unhappy. Now, again, taking that whole information, you're diving deeper into what caused that dissatisfaction. So there could be multiple data sources that can help you here. If you want to go ahead and use LLMs again, this would be about passing the data that you derived from step one to just ask the LLM of rationale on why is this happening. And also you can do this by using different other techniques, like let's say you set up a survey with the dissatisfied customers. It also gives you critical information on what you need to change. So this can be done in multiple different ways, and I didn't want to specifically point out one thing here, given that this is just a broader example. But if you did want to leverage LLMs for step two as well, you can just pass back the original data here with also some additional context on what were the past interactions from the customer, what leads to specific negative sentiments from this user base. So then that helps you split across and get different root causes of what got you there. You can, again, like I said, add additional data sources to this, like say other interactions, other touch points, be different things like surveys that you can add on here, which leads you to this step two. And I think your final question was on how do you implement the product change to solve this. This again, like I mentioned in the presentation, you have to go back to your business context on what were specific things that you can solve and what are some ways for you to get there. Again, this is very specific to each business, very specific to each problem. So that would again change, but overall as a framework, I think it's really about going back to contextualize your problem and then moving the needle in that specific way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You were talking about using the LLM to make inferences on your data after you did the first step step, right? Is the context window big enough to handle that much data? Like, how are you passing that data to the context?
Great question. So I think depending on the different models you use, you can get away with passing a lot of information within that context window, depending on the parameters of the model you're using. However, another approach could also be to chunk down your data into different batches and then process it parallelly or concurrently to then derive the overall output. So it can be done in a few different ways, but depending on like your cost constraints as well as like availabilities of different models, I think, and also depending on what your data source is. I never spoke about what exactly is the data you're trying to pass to get the sentiment output. If it's just like say a survey response, that could be really quite small, depending on how much someone wants to type. So yeah, it really depends on the use case, but there are some ways to get around this by either batch processing or using specific models that allow you to do this.
And then I guess my follow-up is like, what are the benefits to using the LLM as the judge there, as opposed to just like standard statistical analysis or models?
So the follow-up question is, what is the benefit of using LLMs versus standard models?
Yeah, just like how you would normally come up with causes before large language models were like accessible.
Sorry, he was saying, how do you come up with this before large language models existed? To think about this specific case, yeah, there's definitely been some ways to conduct sentiment analysis even before LLMs, but they're just not as powerful. One thing I can think of, which we even did in the MSDX program back in the day, was like different NLP libraries like data sentiment, which would just look at specific keywords and then mark them as either positive or negative. That's just not as powerful when you think about semantic meanings of text. But again, like the real problem here is how accurate your use case. Like, if you think about how would you get this if you did not have an LLM, it's probably by reaching out to your customers via surveys. I think the response rate for surveys is always not that high. I think even as an industry, I mean across any industry, you probably only get about 10-15% of responses at the max from your customers, and it's already a biased thing because you typically take surveys if you're really unhappy with certain things that happened or really satisfied, right? You're not getting a real read on scaled data on how your customers are actually feeling. So in the lack of LLMs, you could have either relied on a biased smaller sample, or you could have used different techniques, like say, which did not really capture the semantic meaning of the text, and probably not as easy to scale or not as accurate, which is why you would use LLMs in this use case. However, I think there are many other use cases where it probably doesn't make sense to use LLMs. So you really do have to think about the cost versus benefit of doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we implement a product changes and then it successfully increase the revenue, but at the same time, the other metrics like user engagement goes down, then what should we do next and how do we make the trade-off?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you want to implement any product changes, you would always have not just a primary metric, but some guardrails. So when you're running different experiments with the feature changes that you're suggesting, you are automatically kind of tracking whether your guardrails are going up or down. And I think that should be already part of your measurement plan when you set this up. So I think that's typically how you control for this sort of variables. And you also don't want to launch it out to your audience immediately. You want to have some measured approach of how you want to validate the changes here, have like a test and control group, for example, to first see how metrics move. In like what you were saying, if the guardrails are badly affected, then there's something that you need to go back to your original analysis and kind of again weigh in like how important is your key metric, which might be revenue versus something else, and kind of change your feature or change your analysis accordingly.
hallucination throws a wrench in the system, and how do you work around it?
So the question is, how much does hallucination throw around in the system, and how do you get around, work around that problem? I do, since I've been kind of playing around with these type of models and data for a few years now, I do think it's naturally gotten a lot better with so many different developments happening in AI, but it's still a very real problem. So again, like, we do have to set certain guardrails where even within your, like I was showing in one of the architecture before this, like even within your framework, you need to have some way to evaluate your output either via a judge or certain like hard-coded parameters where you say if the output has XYZ thing, then you don't want, you kind of have to rerun your prompt engineering. So that's why I think human in the loop is still very important in terms of how you evaluate these results. But at scale, you can always have an LLM judge as well to validate your responses, have certain quality parameters to say, if it passes the bar, then I will, like launch this feature out and present this. So I think that's the only way I've been able to deal around with this challenge of hallucination, non-deterministic results. Any other questions? That might be all.
So I have my
Yeah.
last question, and the students are now in practicum, right? So they're in their second month, maybe, or something. And I know you also had practicum, I think you might have been in the same cohort, actually, now that I saw your years. But what do you think, having worked in so many different organizations, about organization itself? When you get to the company, are they really organized? Do they have everything together for you? Are you finding like, oh yeah, I had work in the first week? Or is it more about finding your own way? What percentage do you feel is me being a self-starter versus the company giving me like this exact concrete thing to do?
Great question. So Victor's question is related to, with you all starting the practicum and having started it for the last few months, what I think about organization and how, could you repeat that last part, Victor?
So-
How being self,
I like to say that organizations are completely disorganized for the most part. I think humans as an entity, we don't really know how to organize ourselves, although we pretend to. And so we call these things organizations, even though they're not organized. And so I kind of want to hear your opinion as well. Like, what do you think about that? When you got to each and every work experience, did you always feel like, this is a bit disorganized, or I have to lead this more than I expected to? So as a student, I had this mentality that the world is perfect. And I get into the world and I'm like, wow, things are really bad. So I kind of want to hear what you think.
Yeah, great question. So Victor was asking about how disorganized organizations are. My experience from working in these different sort of companies with different approaches to how things work. I'll talk a little bit about my practicum experience from back in the day. I was working with Purposeful AI, which is a smaller startup. They have clients in the biotech space, and they were really focused on having great engineering systems. My project on that startup was to create a Python library to solve differential equations of certain things that they were interested about, which they wanted to have as an internal library they can leverage for different problems that they're trying to solve, especially in the biospace. So going there, I was also like just being very new to ML or like the way that things work in the industry. I was quite honestly like very disorganized. I would say like it was quite tough to go from just being given a blanket statement as a master's student here to get to develop that actual library. So what did that involve? It was really about like connecting with specific engineers on their team to understand, have they worked on similar problems before? Well, how do we get started? This is just a very long-term like research project, it seems like. How do we translate that back to how it's going to be used for different purposes within their team? So understanding something like this then helped us get started on this practical project. I think overall, just to say that, a lot of different teams work in different ways. I think in my most recent experience at Meta, because it's such a large company, there's first of all like so much of structure involved in who owns what. There's like clear roles and responsibilities. Whereas if I think back to my practicum days, I was just talking to everyone and anyone, including the CTO, including like the CEO. I just want to understand how to get started with this problem. So it was, I think it's really dependent on what type of organization you go to. Definitely resonate with Victor's point of view that there is a lot of disorganization within each of these, and you have to get around creatively to find ways to improve and grow in that structure. Yeah, go ahead.
Actually relating, he's aging, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, anyway, so relating to that question, that's a really great question, but it reminds me of a more technical question about agentic AI. Because AI agent, many times you need companies to establish workflow. So then you input those workflow into the agent system. But that relates to how you need to get things organized. I'm curious, based upon your experience, what company, either Meta or other companies, try to adopt such kind of workflow mindset and put it into the AI agent. Do you see any kind of challenges, or do you see any kind of changes or pushbackers for company to embrace agentic AI agent, which require to have a clear workflow definition every follow-up?
Great question. So their question is on agentic AI workflows. How, if there's first of all a push to develop these, and how do you come up with the specific workflows and work with that structure? In my personal experience, there is a very strong push to increase productivity by using agentic AI, regardless of your, like job role. Every single function across verticals is, definitely like moving towards leveraging agentic AI in different ways. And because you have to, I guess, create specific workflows, it also allows you to think of what are some tasks that have very clear definitions and constructs, which you can automate very well, versus more ambiguous problems where there's more of like a human in the loop needed. So I think one thing is about like clear distinction of what warrants this agentic AI use case versus not. And the other thing I think of as a challenge with that system is, especially when you think about it from the coding perspective, in terms of automating code via like different agents, the biggest challenge I think across the industry I've seen is debugging, as well as what happens if there's certain things that breaks from this whole framework that you've created with an agent. I think that's becoming more time consuming from my experience when things break and there's specific bugs that you need to resolve. So then you kind of have to go back to where you started and almost feels like you're starting from scratch. So I think that's my biggest pain point at the moment. I'm sure there's research and across the industry that's happening to resolve this problem of debugging. But yeah, like I said, even with the LLMs, while there's clear value in adopting it, there's also reason for us to think just to pause and think about when you want to do this versus not, despite there being an overall push in the industry, and also go back to, just go back to basics just to see how do you want to construct this, how do you want to leverage different outputs from agents. So that's my overall thought there. Yeah, go ahead.
When doing your troubleshooting,
Yeah.
how often do you have one key indicators, like this is the problem? Like in manufacturing, we show the product plot where like 7% of the data is 80% of the problem. Have you seen that?
So the question was on how often do you have one clear problem to solve? Almost never. It's always like so many different things going wrong. I just showed like a utopian case where, you identified one single thing that's going to magically resolve everything. I've never seen that happen. There's often too much to solve, which in some ways is good. There's always, growth, room for growth and improvement. So, yeah, I've also not, similar to your experience, not come across that very often. there's no other questions, we could end early. I've definitely been on the other side and been wanting to get back to my assignments and different
Oh,
things,
no.
or just life.
They're gonna storm you. The line is gonna be this long and out the door. So yeah, if we don't have any more public questions, we can now move to private questions. I think Shree will be here a little bit longer for us, so let's do our speaker one.